The golden morning light seeped through the curtains, but for Ethan Parker there was no warmth in it. He woke up with a pounding headache, his body sore from the restless night. His world had come crashing down after discovering the truth. His wife, Olivia, had been having an affair for over a year. The weight of betrayal settled in his chest like a heavy stone. Stumbling towards the bathroom, he turned on the cold shower, hoping to numb his emotions. The mirror reflected a man he barely recognized: thinning hair, tired eyes, and a frame that had once been strong but now bore the marks of stress and neglect. He couldn't help but recall how he used to mock men who let themselves go after marriage. And yet, here he was, on the other side of that cruel joke. Shaking off his self-pity, Ethan grabbed a razor and decided on something drastic. He shaved his head clean, the blade scraping away not just the hair, but a part of his past, a part of the man who had once believed in Olivia's loyalty. With each stroke, he felt himself shedding the weak, betrayed husband, transforming into someone new, someone ready to fight back. He wasn't going to drown in sorrow. He had a plan. Stepping out of the shower, he picked up his phone and logged into their joint bank account. With swift, deliberate actions, he transferred the savings into a new account under his name, securing what was rightfully his. Next, he quit his job at the Ford dealership, ensuring that Olivia wouldn't use his stable income against him in court. Then, with a final touch of defiance, he canceled their shared credit cards and phone plan. For the first time in months, Ethan felt in control. Hungry, but unwilling to eat the takeout leftovers in the fridge, he decided to drive to the one person who had never failed him: his grandfather, Henry Parker. If there was anyone who could offer him clear-headed advice, it was the man who had built a legacy of honesty, hard work, and strict morals. As Ethan pulled into the long driveway of his grandfather's ranch, the old man stood on the porch, arms crossed. He raised an eyebrow at Ethan's new look. "Well, you either joined the military or you're planning something big," Henry remarked gruffly. Ethan let out a dry chuckle, rubbing his smooth head. "I need your advice, Grandpa." Henry gestured toward the rocking chairs on the porch. "Let's talk." Ethan took a deep breath. He was done playing the victim. It was time to take action. Henry Parker sat back in his rocking chair, a cigar resting between his fingers as he studied his grandson. "Tell me everything," he said simply. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then let the truth spill out. Olivia's infidelity, the year of lies, the humiliation of being played for a fool. Henry listened in silence, his sharp blue eyes never leaving Ethan's face. When Ethan finished, his grandfather exhaled a stream of smoke and nodded. "You did the right thing securing your finances," Henry said. "Women like her. They always think they've got the upper hand. But you're not some helpless fool, Ethan. You're a Parker, and Parkers don't roll over." Ethan clenched his fists. "I don't just want to move on. I want justice. I want her to feel the weight of what she's done." Henry smirked. "Good. Then we make sure she doesn't win. First, we need to keep your kids close. If she thinks she's taking them, she's dead wrong." "How do I do that?" "The courts always favor the mother," Ethan said, frustration bubbling in his voice. "You need to be smart, boy. We hit her where it hurts. Reputation, finances, support system. She has weaknesses. You just have to find them. And I know just the man who can help." Henry pulled out his old rotary phone and dialed a number. Ethan watched as his grandfather spoke in low, deliberate tones. When he hung up, Henry grinned. "Bill's coming over. He's got connections. We'll make sure Olivia regrets every choice she made." Ethan leaned back in his chair, for the first time feeling a flicker of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. He had an army, and he was ready to take back his life. A few hours later, Bill Dawson pulled up in his dusty truck, stepping out with the confidence of a man who had seen it all. A retired judge, Bill had helped plenty of men navigate messy divorces, and Ethan knew he was exactly the kind of ally he needed. "You've got yourself in a tough spot, son," Bill said as he shook Ethan's hand. "But there's always a way to come out on top. Let's figure out how." The three men sat around the wooden table on the porch, whiskey glasses in hand. Henry laid out the basics while Ethan filled in the gaps. Bill listened carefully, nodding occasionally, his weathered face unreadable. "First off, we make sure she doesn't get full custody," Bill said. "Judges favor stability. If you're living on your grandfather's ranch, that's a strong foundation. You've got family support, a safe environment, and plenty of space. That's a plus." Ethan nodded, absorbing every word. "What about finances?" "I already moved my savings, but she might try to come after me for alimony." Bill smirked. "That's why you quit your job. No income means no high payments. Smart move. But you'll need some under-the-table work to stay afloat. Lucky for you, Henry has plenty of that." Henry chuckled. "I'll pay you in cash. Courts can't take what they can't see." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. "And what about her reputation?" "She's the one who cheated." Bill took a sip of his whiskey. "That's where we make things uncomfortable for her. Small towns don't take kindly to cheaters. If she's been flaunting her affair, people will talk. We make sure the right people hear about it. Social pressure can work in your favor." Ethan smirked. "So we make sure she pays, one way or another." Bill leaned forward. "Exactly. But don't get sloppy. We do this right. Make her regret every lie she ever told." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was taking back control. Ethan knew that Olivia had built her life on appearances. She craved the validation of others, carefully curating a persona of a devoted wife and loving mother. If the town turned against her, her perfect facade would crumble. And that was exactly what Ethan planned to do. The first step was to expose the truth, subtly at first, and then with undeniable proof. Bill had suggested leveraging social connections. Small towns thrived on whispers, and once the right people started talking, Olivia would find herself at the center of an unforgiving storm. Henry, ever the tactician, reached out to some of the more influential figures in town. A conversation here, a casual remark there. Soon enough, murmurs of Olivia's infidelity were swirling around the community. The school mothers, who had once admired her, now eyed her with suspicion. The church elders, who valued family values above all, began to distance themselves. The women at the local grocery store, who thrived on gossip, made sure everyone knew about Olivia's betrayal. Ethan also took matters into his own hands. He combed through Olivia's social media accounts, noting every moment she had spent with her lover, every check-in at a hotel, every suspicious business trip that coincided with her absence from home. He carefully saved screenshots and organized them into a file. When the time came, this evidence would serve him well in court. But exposing Olivia was only part of the plan. Ethan also needed proof of her unfitness as a mother. With Bill's connections, he managed to acquire small surveillance equipment, discreet enough to blend into the home. Ethan placed hidden cameras in the living room and kitchen, the areas Olivia frequented the most when she was home. He wasn't spying for the sake of revenge. He needed proof that she prioritized her lover over their children. And it didn't take long for Olivia to incriminate herself. One evening, when Olivia returned home late, she stumbled into the house, clearly intoxicated. The kids had been asleep for hours, unaware that their mother had spent the night drinking instead of being with them. The camera caught everything: her slurred words, her reckless movements, and the moment she ignored Ethan's questions about where she had been. The next morning, Ethan reviewed the footage and sent a copy to Bill. "This is gold," Bill said. "This paints her as irresponsible. The more of these incidents we have, the stronger your case will be in court." Ethan nodded. This is just the beginning. But he wasn't stopping there. Next, he planned to confront Olivia directly, to make her aware that she was losing control, that she no longer held all the power. It was time for Olivia to realize that the life she had built was about to come crashing down. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, waiting. The dim glow of the overhead light barely illuminated the tension thick in the air. He had spent the past week collecting irrefutable proof of Olivia's reckless behavior. The late nights, the drinking, the neglect. It was all documented, waiting to be laid bare. He heard the door creak open, followed by the click of Olivia's heels against the hardwood floor. She was home late again, well past midnight. Her steps were uneven, a clear sign of one too many drinks. She barely noticed Ethan sitting in the shadows as she dropped her purse on the counter and headed straight for the fridge. "Long night?" Ethan's voice was calm, but his eyes held steel. Olivia froze, her hand still gripping the refrigerator handle. She turned, narrowing her eyes. "What are you still doing up?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Waiting for my wife, wondering when she was going to come home." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Don't start with this, Ethan. I had a business dinner." "A business dinner?" He raised an eyebrow, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his phone. "Is that what you call bar hopping with your lover?" He tapped the screen, letting the video play. Olivia's drunken state, her arms wrapped around another man, the unmistakable kiss they shared. The color drained from Olivia's face. "You—" "I know everything," Ethan interrupted, his voice unwavering. "I know where you've been. I know who you've been with. And I know exactly how little you care about this family." She clenched her jaw, trying to regain her composure. "You've been spying on me?" Ethan let out a humorless chuckle. "No, Olivia. I've been gathering evidence. Evidence that will prove you're an unfit mother when I take this to court." For the first time in a long time, Olivia looked shaken. Her confident demeanor cracked as she processed his words. "You wouldn't," she whispered, but there was no conviction behind her statement. Ethan stood, towering over her. "I would, and I will." She stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, we can fix this." He shook his head. "No, Olivia, you broke this, and now you're going to face the consequences." Ethan knew that Olivia wouldn't back down easily. She had built her entire identity around being the perfect wife and mother in the eyes of their social circle. Losing custody of the kids would shatter that illusion. But Ethan wasn't going to let sentiment cloud his judgment. This was about protecting his children from a woman who had chosen her selfish desires over their well-being. The very next morning, Ethan contacted his lawyer, Robert Kingston, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney known for his expertise in high-conflict divorce cases. Over a cup of black coffee, Ethan laid out everything: Olivia's late nights, the neglect, the substance abuse, and, most importantly, the irrefutable video evidence. Robert listened carefully, jotting down notes before looking up. "This is more than enough to build a solid case," Robert said. "We'll file for full custody immediately. Given what you've gathered, the court will see that you're the more stable parent." Ethan exhaled, feeling a weight lifting off his shoulders. "And what about the house? The finances?" Robert leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "That depends." "Have you stopped paying the mortgage?" "Yes," Ethan admitted. "I wanted to force a foreclosure. If the house isn't an option, Olivia won't have a place to live, which weakens her argument for keeping the kids." Robert nodded approvingly. "Smart move. We'll use that to our advantage." With the legal gears set in motion, Ethan turned his attention to the next battle, preparing for Olivia's inevitable retaliation. And he didn't have to wait long. That evening, Olivia stormed into the house, her face contorted with rage. "You're trying to take my children away from me," she shrieked, slamming the door behind her. Ethan remained calm, standing firm in the living room. "I'm not taking them from you, Olivia. You made that choice when you prioritized another man over your family." Tears brimmed in her eyes, but her anger overpowered any vulnerability. "You can't do this to me, Ethan. I'll fight you. I'll take you for everything you have." Ethan sighed, shaking his head. "You won't win, Olivia. You're in no position to." She stared at him, breathing heavily, her mind racing for a way to regain control. "I'll hire the best lawyer. I'll prove you're unfit." Ethan took a step closer, his voice quiet but firm. "Go ahead. Try. But we both know the truth, and so does the court now." The day of the custody hearing arrived with an air of tension so thick that Ethan could feel it weighing down on him. He sat in the cold courtroom, his fingers tapping against the polished wooden table as his lawyer, Robert Kingston, reviewed their legal strategy one last time. Across the room, Olivia sat beside her own attorney, Samantha Reynolds, an aggressive litigator with a reputation for tearing apart opposing arguments. She wore a somber black dress, her face carefully composed into a mask of sorrow. But Ethan saw through it. This was just another performance, another manipulation. The judge entered, and everyone stood before taking their seats again. The case was called, and Robert stood confidently. "Your Honor, we are here today because Mr. Ethan Caldwell is requesting sole custody of his 2 children due to the demonstrable neglect and questionable behavior of Mrs. Olivia Caldwell." Samantha quickly rose. "Your Honor, my client strongly contests this claim. Mrs. Caldwell is a loving mother who has always prioritized her children. These accusations are nothing more than an attempt to punish her for the breakdown of their marriage." Ethan clenched his jaw but remained silent. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting his children. Robert wasted no time. "Your Honor, we have presented evidence that Mrs. Caldwell has repeatedly come home intoxicated, failed to pick up her children from school, and engaged in extramarital affairs while neglecting her parental duties." Samantha countered, her voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, even if these allegations were true, they do not prove that Mrs. Caldwell is unfit to care for her children. A mistake in judgment does not equate to an inability to parent." Robert nodded, unshaken. "Then let's move to the evidence, Your Honor." A large screen was wheeled into the courtroom, and Robert played the surveillance footage. The room fell silent as video after video showed Olivia stumbling into the house late at night, ignoring her children's calls, and engaging in activities that made her priorities painfully clear. Ethan watched as Olivia's carefully crafted composure cracked. Her fingers gripped the table tightly, and for the first time, there was real fear in her eyes. The judge leaned forward, taking notes before looking up. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you have any explanation for this behavior?" Olivia opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her lawyer jumped in. "Your Honor, my client was going through an incredibly difficult time emotionally. She is willing to seek therapy and work towards a better future for her children." The judge exhaled deeply. "I appreciate the sentiment, Ms. Reynolds, but my priority here is the well-being of the children. I will take this evidence into account before making my final decision." The hearing adjourned for the day, and as Ethan walked out of the courtroom, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The following morning, Ethan sat in the courtroom, his heart pounding as he awaited the judge's final decision. Olivia sat across from him, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She looked exhausted, her confident facade from the previous hearings completely shattered. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she barely reacted. The weight of the evidence against her was impossible to ignore. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell silent. Everyone rose before taking their seats again. Judge Harrison cleared his throat and looked at both parties before beginning. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented, including surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and financial records. The primary concern of this court is the well-being of the children, and it is evident that their stability has been compromised by Mrs. Caldwell's actions." Olivia visibly tensed, her fingers digging into the arms of her chair. The judge continued, his tone firm but fair. "While I acknowledge that Mrs. Caldwell has expressed a willingness to seek therapy and improve her situation, the reality remains that her behavior over the past year has significantly impacted her children. Therefore, I am granting full custody of the children to Mr. Ethan Caldwell." A collective gasp filled the room. Olivia shook her head in disbelief, her eyes brimming with tears. Her lawyer quickly stood. "Your Honor, my client would like to request supervised visitation rights." The judge nodded. "That request is granted. Mrs. Caldwell will have supervised visitation on weekends until she can demonstrate sustained improvement in her circumstances. Additionally, she is required to complete a 6-month rehabilitation and parental counseling program before any future adjustments to this arrangement will be considered." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the relief wash over him. He had fought for this, not out of spite, but to protect his children from a toxic environment. Now, they would finally have a chance at stability. Olivia, on the other hand, looked devastated. Her mouth opened as if she wanted to protest, but nothing came out. Finally, she lowered her head, accepting the consequences of her actions. As the judge adjourned the session, Ethan stood and turned to his lawyer. Robert gave him a satisfied nod. "You did it," he said. "Now, go take care of your kids." Ethan stepped out of the courtroom, breathing in the crisp morning air. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. His children were waiting for him, and for the first time in a long time, he knew everything would be okay.